Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. We have been so busy over the past few weeks putting together the final touches on our course that is now being released called Nature Care Solutions Reclaim Your Power to Heal. So, if you haven't been following along with the launch of this course, then I'll put a link in the bottom so you can check it out. But this is going to be a phenomenal live interactive course that's going to go over the span of about 8 weeks. We'll be meeting each week, going through a new module, and I'm going to show you and teach you basically all of the same things that I use successfully on myself, on my kids, and have for thousands of different patients over the course of over 20 plus years around how to deal with the myriad of health challenges that you come across at home, while travel, and acute care management without medications. So if that sounds interesting for you, click the link below and check it out. This is an incredibly timely course. I really do feel like on so many aspects of our life, when you start to look around, that we are being asked to step forward into a greater and greater degree of self-sufficiency, sovereignty, inner knowing, um, inner authority as far as many aspects of our lives. I feel like people are finding new ways to be in a better position around their finances, around education, and health being another major one. What I've learned over the years is that so many of the things that we come across when it comes to health can be managed effectively, safely, efficiently using natural means. It's just a matter of the knowing what to do and then having the things that you need on hand and how do you apply them when the time comes. So I want to take you on that journey and teach you basically what I do with my family and have been for a long time successfully. I want people to know how to handle situations when they come across them. As I really do feel we are in changing times here, and we do need to be able to be more sovereign in many different ways, and health being one of the big ones that we can reclaim our power to heal. Our body is phenomenal at healing. We often just need to know how to support it properly and remove some of the obstacles getting in the way. So if any of that appeals to you, go and check that out. This course was inspired when I was away in Mexico for almost a year with my family, and I was managing a myriad of different challenges that came up for health for not just ourselves and my kids, but also for the community that we were a part of while we were there. So I got lots of experience working with this stuff again, outside of what I had done with my own family and with thousands of patients over the years. So check it out. It is only available until this Sunday, April 23rd at midnight, and then the cart closes. And there are some special bonuses in there that you can take a look at that will only be offered with this specific beta launch. In our show today, we are talking to Jiulio Consiglio again. He's been a guest on our show several times. We always love chatting with Giulio. He's a good friend of ours now. And he shed some light on the concept of ego death, how to navigate fear, how we access infinite possibilities, and then what we do to actually sabotage that and limit our possibilities for whatever that might be. We talk a little bit about financial scares and how our thoughts literally open up doorways to alternate dimensions of reality. This is a really fascinating interview. So I hope you guys enjoy this and go check out the course. I don't know when I'm going to be offering this course again, particularly when I'll be offering it again live. So go and take a look at it. Even if it interests you in this slight, go and take a look at it and see what you think. All right, everybody, much love to all of you. If you are enjoying these episodes and if you're finding them helpful, please subscribe, share, like, and post comments. If you're listening to this through the podcast, please leave a review and give us a 5-star review if you're really enjoying this content. It really does help the algorithms to help us expand this message out to more and more people. All right, thanks so much to everybody, and I appreciate the support. Bye-bye. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspired Podcast. And we are here back again, continuing on with our series on life, death, and beyond, exploring our greater reality. And we brought back a good time, long-term friend now of ours, Jiulio Consiglio. And Giulio's been with us several times. I'm not sure how many we've done now. I'll put up links for the other episodes that we've done. But again, we like to touch base with Giulio on just about any series and get his insights Giulio's written several books, so we've got most of them here. The Healing Frequency, Open Your Third Eye. His most recent one is Cosmic Consciousness. And
There's one more. I'm
yeah,
missing one, I think, right,
Change Your
Giulio?
Brain. Change,
My first book, Challenge Your Thoughts,
Challenge Your
and
Challenge
I,
your
Thoughts.
I have
thoughts.
a new one coming out in November, Intuitive Calm.
Intuitive
Intuitive calm.
calm.
Oh, I
Hmm.
like that. That has been a central theme in a lot of the conversations too around this necessity on coming back to that different layer of information, that intuition, sort of stepping more away from the logical linearity, or putting it more in its rightful place, but tapping into um, a different type of information that we have access to if we can get into that slowing things down and stillness and tap into that intuitive knowing. So I'm not sure if that's what your book is about, but it sounds like that's going to be well needed at this time.
It's a collaboration, and it's utilizing the chakras to come back into that dimension of stillness and how to just observe and be quite centered.
Awesome. That'll be great. When are you thinking that's going to be out?
November.
I believe it releases November 8th, I want to say.
Okay, awesome. We'll definitely have you back when that comes out and get the word out on that. But Giulio, welcome back again with us.
Thank you, Jason and Tia. It's always a pleasure to be here with you both. It's like having coffee time with family here.
Tay and
Totally.
I were talking before. We're like, what are we going to talk to Giulio about? And it's like, really, I just want to say, Giulio, this is the topic. What do you think is important that we should know about this from your perspective and your lens? And then we'll kind of go wherever we want to go. But I'd love to hear your perspective just around death and what death is and experience around it. And
And you experienced a death of some sort earlier on.
mhm.
Can you maybe speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I'll start there. So in the fall of 2005, what appeared on the surface was my life was heading downhill. So I had just prior to that, I had lost a brother to cancer. I had a failed marriage, and then I was given a health scare. And I wanted answers. I needed to know why things were happening, what was happening. And so I began to really sort of create this white hot desire to know. And so this October came around and I was in between patients and I had a cancellation. So I did what I usually do. I jump in the car and I would just try to relax and be still. Well, I had been reading a book by Dr. Daniel Amen, of all names, Amen. And there was one phrase in the book, and it went something like this. And to be honest, I don't think I got past page 62 of that book. It went along the lines, when you allow negative thoughts to go unchallenged, and that struck something deeply within me. So I didn't give it much thought after that. But on this particular day, I had the book sitting on the passenger seat, and I began to reflect on that thought. In the instant that I reflected on that thought, not male, not female voice came up through my chest, audible, and said, challenge your thoughts. In that instant, the third eye began to vibrate. I don't want to say violently, but it really got my attention. And it began to automatically shut down every automatic negative thought or emotion that was trying to come to my consciousness. I was now sort of coming into like a surrendered state. And I distinctly remember too, turning my head and experiencing just profound clarity. So believe it or not, I still had a patient to get back to. I had one more patient left. So I got back to the dental office, finished that patient, and the entire time I still have this third eye going off, just immediately shutting down every automatic negative thought. So I get in the car, I'm driving home, and now it's a really bad rainstorm. Feeling emotionally spent, I jump on the couch and I said, just let me die. And I popped out. I can't tell you how long I was gone. I can't tell you where I went. When I came back, I knew exactly what had happened. I just had what I would describe as knowingness, just a pure knowing. And within a few weeks, I began to experience automatic writing. And by Christmas, so that was now the fall, by Christmas, I had already written my first book, Challenge Your Thoughts. So things just really began to accelerate after that experience.
Giulio, when you popped out, do you remember what it was like? Where did you kind of go, or what was that space even like when you were there?
And what popped? Like, what was the sensation there?
That's a great question. When I jumped on the couch, I literally felt my life force or my soul come up through my chest and pop out. And when I popped out, I can't tell you where I went. All I know is I was gone. And whatever took place in that instant or moment or moments, when I returned, I knew what had happened, who I was. The knowing was automatic, and like I said, I'd be within weeks I'd be driving and then have to pull over because the automatic writing, it was like the floodgates were opened. So I can't tell you where I went or how long I was gone. All I know is that I experienced what they describe as dying before you die. So you experience that ego death, and when the ego death takes place, that 3D thinking mind is now dissolved and it's replaced with stillness or universal or cosmic consciousness. So there's that moment by moment communion and awareness and direct experience of oneness and with the all that is.
Giulio, for as you're describing that, most people that go through the day-to-day affairs of living are so linked into the thinking mind and associate completely with that, that it's even hard to know what it would be like without it. I know for me personally, the only time when I actually started to understand what it means when you say stillness, inner stillness, is after spending the first, my first course at Vipassana, the 10-day silent meditation. And it was through that experience, through just sitting and just watching the thoughts come and go, sitting and watching the physical sensation, whether it be pleasurable or unpleasurable, come and go. The repetitiveness of just sitting to observe allowed me the space between being wrapped up and actually then stepping into watching all of it, the witness, being the witness of it. Is that essentially the tool that we have to be able to become the observer, the witness of that, rather than being so entwined with the ego that it becomes us through just constant association with that?
So I'm gonna start by saying this. We all come on into this realm. We come into this realm taking on that separation identity. So we take on an egoic mind. Whether we take it on completely and fully identify with it or partially, and it all depends on where we are at on our spiritual evolution when we manifest and come into this realm. So we need to, number one, recognize that we are innocent in that we took on this role, and even though we've taken on this egoic mind, we still remain who we are in essence, innocent. So the one thing I want to say is regarding the ego, there's nothing wrong with it. The question becomes, is it helping you? Is it helping you live an expansive life? What are your relationships look like? What does your financial look like? Because the egoic mind impacts every aspect of our lives. So identifying with the ego, nothing wrong with it. The problem becomes, or if the desire is to evolve and grow, or for me personally, it was to become unstuck, I needed to know how to shift. Because to be honest, I didn't even know that there was a level of awareness until it happened to me beyond the thinking mind. And it's that dimension of inner stillness. So inner stillness, there's no thinking your way to it. It's becoming aware of it. So you mentioned earlier the awareness of the thoughts. Well, enlightenment is being aware of the awareness, being aware that you are aware. That's when you begin to create a bit of space now, becoming aware of the awareness, because it's the awareness that is the soul itself. So the thing is, we are mind, body, and soul. Most of us just simply identify with the ego. And so with that, we identify as a body. But the egoic mind, from a spiritual vantage point, the egoic mind is illusory. It's the dreaming state. And it's the dreaming state because it's past and future. And that's all it can do is repeat itself, past and future. That's where the emotions come from. It is also fear itself. It is also the belief in separation from each other and from source. And is also the reason why humanity, the collective, is in the state that it's in right now. It's that belief in separation. Now, there is thankfully a solution, and it's to go inward. We hear that phrase, one person can make a difference. Absolutely, because when one heals, the collective heals. So becoming aware of the thinking mind, that thoughts are coming, and they are past and future projecting. So it's a thought based in the past, and then that projects in the future. And that's what limits most people. If I give you an example, if we get in a car and we drive 30 miles backwards and then 30 miles forward, and we do that for the next 50, 60, 70 years, we're going to get nowhere. So the present moment is where we begin to ascend in consciousness and rise in consciousness. And when you're absolutely anchored in the present, moment by moment, that's when the egoic mind really loses its grip on one's consciousness. So now you don't have to really identify with it. You see it as possibility, potential, contrast to your light, and it actually becomes a gift, because a lot of people or students that I've taught, have this fear of, I'm going to lose everything. And you're actually now operating through non-attachment, actually. So it's no longer controlling you. You are now operating consciously, and the ego, instead of having control over one's mind, is now orbiting, is now on the outskirts, and you take what you need, but it no longer controls you.
Yeah, that kind of ties into, I was going to ask you around what is sort of the optimal relationship then, because we talk a lot of times around trying to help people connect more to intuition and inner knowing and connect, because I think we're just ultimately we're more disconnected from that. We're much more locked into, we know what logic and linear thinking is like. From your perspective, how does that look in our lives when those things are balanced? How much of the logical linearity do we need? Or is that even changing? Do we still need so much of it? I mean, I guess, how do we operate in our life for someone practically when they're wondering, okay, well, I want to be connected to that inner knowing, but I have a life and it requires, certain things. Where do those two things overlap?
That's a great question. So I still, even after my shift, I still worked in the dental field for a couple of years after that. So to be perfectly clear and honest, is most of the time, 95% of the time, you're operating through inner stillness. And the inner stillness is intelligence, and it's intelligence that knows what you need to do. So it's basically like getting on a bike and riding a bike. You don't really have to think, okay, I got to jump on this bike. I got to pedal with my right leg, then I got to pedal with my left leg. It's automatic. When you're operating through that dimension of inner stillness, things are automatic in the sense that you're literally guided moment by moment. Now, you still have to engage and interact with this 3D reality and interact with people. So you will engage the egoic thinking mind when necessary, really, to communicate or to converse. But for the most part, the inner being is brought to the forefront of one's consciousness, and you're operating consciously. When I say consciously, is when an automatic negative thought arises, or when an emotion arises, which most tend to be negative, whether it's guilt, fear, sadness, you have a choice because you're no longer identifying with the egoic mind. So when fear presents itself or something from the past tries to project into the future, you are observing it and deciding whether or not you're going to believe it. And from a conscious place, you tend to not give it any belief. And what happens is when that automatic negative thought arises, it doesn't even have, because it can't live off your vital energy because you're not reacting to it, it dies within your consciousness. And that's how you literally resurrect yourself moment by moment. The egoic mind is allowed to die and you are allowed to ascend. So I think in the average day, there's about 86,400 seconds. If we divide that by 2, that's how many times a master dies in a day. So you take a breath in, you let that go, and there's a death. You take another breath, and then you let that go. There's another moment that's died. And that's egoic death, moment by moment. So it's not just, I went through egoic death and it was just that one-time thing. Mastery is moment by moment. And when you die, when I say you, the egoic mind, which we aren't anyways, it's a temporary persona we take on in this reality. What is allowed to shine through is the infinite intelligence of Source or God. And you realize that's all there is, that the thinking mind is just something we take on to interact and to, it helps us play our roles, but it's not who we are in essence.
There's a lesson of impermanence and detachment right there, as well as you're describing it. Where is then the place of, where do thoughts come from? And then where's the place then for emotions? Is there any relevance then to emotions?
So thoughts come from, I'm going to say, 2 different sources. So we have the collective that has already been here. So the collective energy. So we are multidimensional beings. A lot of times we're picking up thoughts and we're picking up emotions even from other people, from parallel realities, possibly from past timelines. There is so much more happening and taking place. The anxiety that served its purpose for my awakening was that I was so sensitive that I was picking up on everyone's and even my own negative energies, but didn't realize what was going on. So it comes from the collective and then from our own individual egoic mind. So whatever we picked up or learned as children, because we're sponges, we're energy sponges. So we pick up a lot of these beliefs, a lot of these thoughts. And the other thing where the thoughts come from is when we see this 3D reality as reality, then we allow the ego to create thoughts about it. And there's more limitation. When the truth is, everything manifested is really spiritual energy. New Earth, for example, is here and now. It's a parallel dimension. And when you look at the outer world through stillness, you see the essence of the all that is and everything. When we look at the world through the conditioned mind, which again, there's nothing wrong with it, we create thoughts about it. And then one thought is a belief that then branches to another belief. I think it's important that I mention too is what a sponsoring thought is. So if we have this basic sponsoring thought, which is like the granddaddy of a thought, of emotions, that we're separate from each other, then from that thought that I'm separate from each other, one is going to operate, I'm going to try to get what I can from that person. I'm going to do what I have to do. There's competition. It's, dog eat dog world. That's how that just sort of expands and branches out. Whereas if you come from a space of we're all one and that there's more than enough, if you come from that sponsoring thought, that sets the stage for future thoughts in the now moment. So I think it was important to touch upon what a sponsoring thought is, because virtually all of us have been conditioned that we're separate from each other, separate from Source or God. And from there, the ego is just allowed to get out of control on an energetic level. And this is why the world is in the situation it's in right now.
When people are working with the thoughts, because I think this is a really important, because it's really one of the foundational steps for transitioning and really creating the change. When the thoughts come up and you are just observing them, and then we basically then from that then choose to either kind of accept or reject it, I guess, and then make our choice from that place. I can almost see people going into a thinking space to then decide what shot they should choose or not choose. And when we talked about before we even began the recording here, you had said something really beautiful, and you were saying just giving it the focus, like just sort of being in the present moment with whatever it is. The pure love or the unconditional love burns everything up. And it's almost like just staying with the present moment with whatever shows up. So if it's a thought or if it's an emotion or whatever it is, just staying there with that allows it to kind of dissolve. And then is it in that dissolution of that that something then spontaneously emerges as far as what to do?
The guidance is always there. And the quieter we get and the more presence we bring to the thinking mind, you begin to create that space. And it's within that space, that nothingness, where those spiritual faculties, wisdom, clarity, and they are instant. They come as literally, they're faster than light. And it's always there. And the more presence you come into, the more guidance you receive. We have to be able to understand or label when that thought arises, that negative thought, what it is, and the implications that it has on one's life for limiting us. So if we have a thought that comes in, I'm stuck, I always feel stuck, that is the past repeating itself. So if we want to continue to remain stuck, we react to that, we contract our energy, the ego feeds off more, gains strength, and we remain in that cycle again, past and future. But if that thought comes and you use it as a reminder to challenge it, to bring presence to it, then that thought comes, you observe it instead of reacting, and then so now you've neutralized it by not giving it belief. And then you take a step further and you use the I am, or the power of the I am already moving forward. Doesn't have to be specific. I am already moving forward in life. And like weights, like weightlifting, like a muscle, the more you do it, the stronger, the more automatic, the more powerful. You end up shifting, not from belief, you come to a knowing that what you state is in fact will come to pass. This is the faith and trust that we need to really operate from, because that's how you make massive shifts in one's life.
I really love the commands, and I remember working with RJ Spina before, and he had mentioned something similar with that too. Were talking about sort of prayer and meditate in different ways of
prayer, affirmation, and commands.
And he was saying commands are really at the most powerful that you can do, because you're actually, rather than almost, you can do beautiful prayers too, but there's an aspect of prayer a lot of times where we're outsourcing it to God or source to ultimately do something, whereas a command, it's like we're acknowledging the God source within ourselves, and then we're stating it that's already done. It reminds me of the prayer that you talk about. That essence of that is really powerful, and that often goes through my head on a regular basis whenever I come across something that I find challenging. I'll often say the prayer that you had mentioned, which is really like a command. It feels like a command in the way that you say it. Maybe share with the audience that, just so they can hear it again if they haven't caught it from before.
I will, and it's an affirmation or a prayer that essentially came to me in a matter of fact way, and I won't go too deep into it, but I heard it audibly. So the prayer goes, all that I desire and the will of God are one, and my will is God's, and God's will is done. You're essentially saying, I am surrendering my will to yours. So I'm not going to resist. I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to resist my circumstances. And source knows your desires, because the desire literally translated means from the Father. So you're now allowing God to express to you and through you without resistance. And that's when you step into that space of miracles and all things become possible.
Giulio, where are we in the world? What's going on right now? There's so much rearrangement and collapsing and recalibration, it seems. From your perspective, through your insights, can you share with us what's going on right now?
The reason why these false and negative systems are collapsing, the reason they are collapsing is because we are here. We are here, and we are in different parts of the world, different parts of the country, and our light is anchored in, and anything that is false must crumble. And that is why it is being brought to its knees. So you can look at it from a 3D perspective and be terrified and afraid and be uncertain. But when you are aligned and you know who you are relative to source, and you understand deeply the promise made to us, so that prayer that I mentioned, when you operate from there, you realize everything is not happening to you but for you, and that it's a reminder not to allow the outer be replayed in the inner, because everything starts from within. So that is why we are seeing these things collapse. That's why we're seeing on a collective level the insanity that the ego has become rise to the surface. On a collective level, it's happening on an individual level. And this is what is ushering in new earth. So all of these systems have been based on greed, corruption, power. They thought they were in power. They never had any power. It's all a fallacy. So that is why these things are taking place, is because there are several masters that are here right now. And yeah, it's just getting started. So it's more important now, more than ever, anchor into the present moment, practice observing the outer world rather than react to it, and then speak into reality with confidence that which you desire. Speak it into reality, think it, focus. So focus on that which you desire, letting go of the how and the when, because when we are attached, when is it going to happen? How is it going to happen? We now handcuff source. That's how powerful we are, because there's no difference. There's no separation between us and source. So this is where faith and trust is cultivated. And there's nothing wrong if no one's had it before. You can cultivate it right now in this moment. You begin, and how you reflect on the times that you've had, for example, some sticky situations, and one way or another, a way was made. And when you reflect on that and you realize, yeah, you know what? I've gone through some sticky situations and I've always come out. So I'm always reminded from A Course in Miracles, there is no order of difficulty in any miracle. All expressions of love are maximal. So there's no order of difficulty with what's going to take place, because there isn't. It just isn't. It's all source anyways.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm seeing play out so clearly now, in the way that I haven't noticed before, is whatever it is that this dying force that has controlled the world for so long, and I'm going to ask you after this what that force is exactly, but they put out an image or an idea or a projection of numbers, which then conjures up lots of emotions and feelings in the masses. And then it's almost as if then we individually and collectively feed that, and in essence create that for these forces that are trying to get us to play along and create for them a particular way of being and a particular reality. Is that really happening? And how does that how are we actually contributing to that which we ultimately do not want to see or have or be within our reality? And where do thoughts play a part in that? And where do emotions play a part in that?
That's a great question. The first thing I will say is we need to take a step back and see this from source, or see this from our creator aspect. This 3D reality is a dream state. Relative to the spiritual realm, relative to the quantum world, this is a shadow world. This is not reality relative to the dimension of inner stillness. And what we see is a reflection of our consciousness and our focus. So we came into this reality, and there is a global collective amnesia. Everyone forgets who they are. This is supposed to be a playground where we temporarily forget who we are, where we come from. And what has happened is generations have continued on, not questioning, so the masses, generations have accepted this idea that things are the way they are based on what they see, not on what they feel, and not on deep knowing. So ultimately, I can give you a name, I can give you labels on what this egoic consciousness is. It's spiritual in nature. So we've heard, religion give it names. So it doesn't matter. Ultimately, it is the false self individually, and it's a false collective consciousness, and it's fear. So fear needs our reaction to perpetuate itself. So when we individually begin to observe fear, not identify with it, not give it the fuel to project itself into the future, when we realize the eternal moment of now is all there is, that's how you begin to dismantle this egoic matrix or this egoic consciousness individually. Because when you start doing it individually, it then is reflected in the outer world, and then it's reflected, you then see yourself as awakened, enlightened through stillness, and then you see everyone as that. And the more people that step into that power and that inner knowingness, because it's not a belief system. Enlightenment is not a belief system. We're not trading one thinking process to another, and you don't even experience that thought, I am God. There's just simply awareness of the non-local self, the unbounded self, the formlessness that is giving, that is the support system for everything and everyone here. So that's how we begin to dismantle it. And with regards to emotions, emotions are simply thoughts that have been energized and have now become movement, have become energized. There's nothing wrong with them. We experience, emotions, for example, happiness when we were with a good friend, and then you leave that friend after having coffee with them. You don't feel that. It's temporary. Nothing wrong with that. The thing is identification with those emotions as that being who we are, same as identifying thoughts, that's what we are. That's when we are now immersed in that 3D reality. And the basis of that, the foundation of that, is fear and separation. So to dismantle this false matrix, you do the inner work and then let go of how and when, and let go of what's not in your control in the outer. Because the moment you control, when I say control, the moment you don't allow automatic negative thoughts control your inner state of being, that's when you are in control. Because now you're operating through faith and trust. And that's where all that you desire begins to now literally become, that phrase, all that you desire, there's nothing missing from that. When I heard that word all is all encompassing. That's why I love that prayer. And I'll even, like Jason said, I'll say it throughout the day. It's automatic. It's just automatic. So that's how we begin to dismantle this matrix. It's doing the inner work. It's not so much, we can, and I did it for 2 years. You do the protests, you speak up, whatever. But I already knew the most important work is the inner work, because when you anchor in, you literally become a matrix destroyer in that sense. You're bringing it down with your light of consciousness.
Beautiful. I even think of our languaging, because as there were a few instances where our girls, specifically one of them, would get really uncomfortable in her body, and she would like squirm, and she would, before we started recording, we mentioned this to you as well, and she would say, Mommy, there's something bothering me and I don't know how to make it go away.
And I don't know why.
And I don't know why. And I said to her, honey, just let it move through you like a current, just let it move through you. And I think before going through all these lessons that all the wonderful speakers, including yourself, have shared with us, I would have said, well, what is it? Like, how are you feeling? Are you sad? Are you mad? And there's almost, within the languaging of how we even speak of things, we're taking ownership and identifying with that fleeting emotion. So as you're saying, allow the emotions to move, our culture has actually taught us to hold on to them, identify with it. I am sad, I am mad, I am unhappy, I am depressed. So there's a locking in rather than allowing things to flow and move. And I've reflected on this even in how we bring this to our children. And I don't want to say I am mad or I am angry. It's just this fleeting emotion. So I feel like even what you're sharing, when we take it in and we reflect on it within our everyday life, we can even start to maybe figure out what works and maybe what doesn't. So even with the way we label things, needs to change a little bit.
If we begin to change our language around it, bringing a conscious approach to it, how are you feeling? I'm experiencing some temporary sadness. So I'm experiencing some temporary sadness, or I'm experiencing some temporary anger. So now you're actually diffusing it, and you're coming from a space of it's not who I am, it's what I'm experiencing. I've mentioned this before in other interviews, and it's important to mention. The ultimate addiction is negative thinking. That is the ultimate addiction, because negative thinking translates to negative emotions. And that's what people really, if we're going to get to the heart of it, become addicted to. So the ego is possessive in nature, and it doesn't want to give up so easily. So because it operates through our vital energy. And if we fully realized that it robs us of our vital energy and limits us and is cutting us off from knowing who we are beyond the thinking mind and remembering the vastness of who we are and that all things are possible, we would begin to really take a step back and say, you know what, there is more to the thinking mind. And wait a minute, what do you mean? So negative thoughts, that thinking mind, that is that addictive nature. And non-attachment is simply the moment you become non-attached to the thinking mind, the egoic mind, that's when you become non-attached to everything else outside of you. And that's actually a good thing, especially in relationships, because now you're not expecting that happiness to always come from that outside person. Because what happens the moment they have a bad day or they can't give it to you? We tend to lose our happiness in that moment. So you take off a lot of pressure off people when you approach relationships in a conscious way. So it's that non-attachment from within, letting go of expectation. Because when you let go of expectation, you actually allow for even more greater and potentials and possibilities to come through.
I think where a lot of people get stuck with that is they think that non-attachment then sort of ties into like, then I'm just sort of in limbo, like I'm not actually doing anything, nothing means anything to me. But I think the direct experience is that when you are able to untether your expectations around stuff, it's like, and naturally then I think you connect more back into that source that's there that informs you, and then it just, you become more inspired, and you actually become much more efficient, and it doesn't stop you from doing what feels like you need to do, but you're actually much less encumbered with all of these other things, and you can allow so many different possibilities to pop in because you're not so stuck to it needing to be and look a specific way.
That was beautifully said, Jason. And what the only thing I would add is your moments actually have even greater meaning to them because you
Mhm.
realize the fleeting nature of it all. So the moments you spend with someone, they actually become more meaningful. Non-attachment is not detachment. Detachment is, I really don't care about anything. No, non-attachment is unconditional love. It's all encompassing, and you're just being the most authentic you in that moment and allow and seeing that other person. What greater gift can you give another person when you see them for who they are in the present moment, not through the limitations of the past?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. I remember Dr. David Hawkins would talk about when he was a psychiatrist and a spiritual teacher, and he would be in the psych ward sometimes, and he would see people, and he said as soon as, if he was able to see them and see the light of God in them, it reflected back to them who they were, and sometimes you would have the spontaneous healings that could occur just from the presence of that. And he said that that's what he felt happened a lot of times, probably with Mother Teresa in Calcutta and some of the different experiences like that, just being able to see the presence of God, of who they really were, and have that reflected back at yourself.
It's funny you mentioned that, and you know what? I would suggest anyone listening to this try this experiment. You try locking eyes with someone at a store; they will not look at you longer than a second because what will happen? And that's the reason why, because you end up seeing the eyes are the window to the soul. So most people just immediately turn away.
We would do when we would run couples retreats, and even not even couples retreats, but you'd actually would have people sit and do eye gazing.
We would have this at the end of the retreat most of the time because it would make people really uncomfortable and squirmy.
It would
It
at
does.
and usually everything, laughing, discomfort, looking away, but at some point you fall into it, and that's usually when tears just start to flow. I
Mhm.
remember Tay and I, after we had first started dating years back, we did that once. We did a couple of retreats, and it was literally all day long. All you're doing was meditating and eye gazing with each other, literally for hours at a time. It
And it
was
was really cool because it was almost as if through that practice, I was like, I could literally see past
yeah.
images, like Jason's face would morph into, and it was almost like how I understood and felt it at the time. It was almost as if I could see his past lives. His face would
Oh,
just change, and I could see him as, as an Asian man and as an Indian man, but it would just kind of change and morph into different shapes and shades. And it was just a phenomenal practice.
Maybe not the first thing most people that are just starting to date would want to start with, but
maybe not.
that was the way we rolled. So
Multi-dimensional experiences, sure, why not?
yeah, why
Yeah.
not?
Why not?
It's like you get to find out pretty quickly if you're compatible or not.
Oh yeah, you're gonna find out soon.
Yeah.
Julio, when you were talking about fear, I want to cycle back to that.
Yeah.
Right now, I would
Mm.
say big ones going on at the moment, tons of fears around financial system stuff. Not that that's really new, like we were talking about before. A lot of that stuff's been going on for years, and even been mentioned years ago. It's just it's all kind of coming up to be sort of, I think, by the
Well,
masses kind of looked at.
especially with the big bank crashes
Yeah.
happening, I think people are realizing that this is a real possibility now taking place.
And so a lot of fear comes up, and then you can see it even in on like groups on different social media and whatnot might kind of talk about it. And it's a tricky one because when we were talking before, I want you to explain what happens when we even start the process of entertaining fear, and how do we navigate that? So when something comes up and it makes us feel that way, what happens when we start to entertain it and make decisions from there? And then what would be the optimal way to deal with these types of things when they're being presented to us right now?
Okay, that's a great question. I'm gonna give an overview too. So we are in one sense, we are not disconnected from the quantum field. In the quantum field, every possible reality outcome is already available there. When we entertain fear, so when we give it automatic belief, or for example, what's happening right now with this financial system, let's say those, and this is not even to blame, but let's say those who have always come from, let's say, for example, a place of lack, or had this fear that there's not enough. So now these fears are going to be amplified with this potential fallout. What we don't fully realize and understand is every automatic thought is a doorway to another reality, quite literally. I mean that literally. It's not maybe. I've experienced it directly. And what happens is when we entertain those thoughts, we shift into that reality. And the universe, God, source, is like a giant photocopier. It can only give us back what we're offering it. So if we're looking at the outside world, repeating it in our consciousness, and people say, well, you're not facing reality. I'm saying that the outer world is not reality. What I'm saying is it's the present, or what you're experiencing right now, was pre-sent based because source, the all that is, knows what you're going to choose because there is no separation. So when those thoughts arise, we have a choice. We can enter into that doorway into a doom and gloom experience, or we can take a step back and instead of reacting to the outside world, perhaps observe the emotions coming to you. And the moment you do that, you begin to peel away layers that this is actually, this is not a fear that just started. It's a fear that's been set in years ago, probably from childhood with a lot of us. So what it's happening is it's now being amplified and brought to the surface. So the other thing I'll mention is, so if you're going to entertain that, well, take what steps you can take. Take some action, because you don't want to be stuck in a deer in headlights, and prepare. But beyond that, again, is when the thought arises, when that fear arises, that's coming from, and if we realize it, it's coming from a place of lack, that fear of loss. So those are emotions that need to be healed within ourselves. And if we realize, you know what, this is just more reason to stir up more emotion, because that's what all of this is doing. It's causing long-held emotions and limiting beliefs come to the surface, and now they're being, it's like trauma being re-triggered and coming to the surface again, re-traumatized. So those emotions need to be faced and dealt with. So healing has to take place. Those triggers, those outside triggers, can either be sources of your suffering, or they can be reminders and triggers to heal something within yourself. But those thoughts are quite literally doorways. When I talk about operating through stillness and observing, when you operate through stillness, you're now allowing anything and all things become possible in the present moment. You're now allowing anything to become possible. I mean that literally. So thoughts are very contracting, very narrow, very focused, very 3D. It's taking a step back and observing more, and then challenging those negative thoughts, that there's always more than enough, that abundance and prosperity continuously flows to me in avalanches. How about we start speaking from that point of view? Let it start from a belief. If it takes a little bit of practice before you even put belief behind it, because most people, they base their beliefs based on what has happened in the past, and they think that's concrete evidence.
Mhm.
It's not. We need to shift beyond past data and say, what will be for us now, in this moment? Clean slate. So you want to eventually get to a place where you're speaking into reality the things that you wish to desire, that you desire to experience, but you want to get to a place where it's absolute knowing. That comes with practice, and that comes with the cultivation of faith and trust.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And if people are wondering, that doesn't mean that you don't act, but I think what happens is you act from a very different knowing as opposed to from the limitations of what your actions can be from that place of fear, which is a very small field of consciousness with very limited possibilities. So we don't want to make our decisions from there. We want to be able to step out so that we have more of these different options available to us. I think of the way you describe fear very much the way we had a conversation before around doubt, and it was the same sort of thing. Every time we doubt, we literally create almost like a part of us kind of goes off and creates another timeline of what that could actually be like because we doubted. And so this is partly why I think it's so important. We keep coming back to this idea of connecting back to that inner knowing more, because when you operate more from there, you doubt yourself a lot less. And eventually, I don't think you doubt yourself at all, the more and more connected we get to it. But when we're operating from up here, it's constant doubt. It's what about this path? What about that path? What about the, and the way it starts to feel is it's like every time I'm doing that, I'm actually pulling a little bit more energy away from this life, this incarnation. I am here that I'm wanting to sort of direct my energies, and I'm kind of siphoning off little bits all the time into something else.
Even our practices that we've been, raised with, and we were taught at school with, like, write down your pros and cons. Well, that's definitely investing in energy of, like, well, if this doesn't happen, then this might and this might. So let me write all those down and overthink it a bit. But it's definitely that level of analysis can lead us astray. But you were speaking earlier about even fear acts very similarly as doubt. Can you speak a little bit more about what's actually happening when we do invest our energy into fear and making decisions from there?
Whenever we operate from fear, fear is essentially the ego. And I describe it as essentially like a multi-headed dragon. It's the exact same thing, only coming disguised as past, future, doubt, uncertainty, fear of sickness, fear of ill health, fear of lack, fear of whatever you can imagine, fear of loss, fear of losing a relationship. It's the same energy, only slightly morphed depending on what facet of life we're talking about. So when we entertain that, when we give energy to doubt, what we're essentially doing is shooting ourselves in the foot, because we're initially robbing ourselves of vital energy. What I understood deeply, even before my shift, because I had great clarity, I just didn't realize what that inner clarity, that stillness was. When I experienced an automatic negative thought, I immediately experienced an attack on a particular chakra. And I realized it was happening. I just didn't know how to deal with it. So we attack ourselves when we operate through fear. And we attack because we're coming from a space of contraction. And what we're doing is we are one with all that is. We are one with life. There's no separation. So the minute you project fear onto something, someone, you're only projecting it upon yourself. It's all a mirror. So when we have doubts, we are coming from a place of doubt. So now we're coming from a place of scarcity and lack. So what happens is we shift and we set the stage for more of that. And it's not that things are being done to us to punish us. It's that we will repeat behaviors and modes of operation until we wake up from those modes of operation, because they are limiting and they're self-destructive. So the purpose of fear, ultimately from a spiritual vantage point, its sole purpose is for awakening. Fear should be a reminder to come back to the now, because fear is always a projection in the future. It should be a reminder, and it should be a reminder that it's not who we are, but what we experience. It's a contrast to our inner light of consciousness or stillness, but it's not who we are. The problem has arisen is that we, from a very young age, have been conditioned to be afraid of so many things, starting with our parents, that it becomes our identity. And when it becomes our identity, it literally becomes a possessive entity. What you are attached to has attached itself to you. It's simple energy, like attracts like. The minute you begin to vibrate higher, so you align with the present moment, that you realize the past is a mind construct because it never arrived in the past, but always in the present, and that the future will never arrive in the future, that it is a mind construct that attempts to limit a future present moment. The more you align with that present moment and realize that the past and future are simply mind constructs attempting to keep you stuck, attempting to keep you in the dreaming state, that's when you begin the process of personal liberation and transcend the thinking mind. Now you're on the mountaintop and you're observing the thoughts, and you are now free. That's what liberation is. Once you do that and you've now separated yourself, so you are now observing it, you've broken out of the ego consciousness or ego matrix. And then from that knowingness of knowing that you're a powerful creator, you now focus on the things you want to create in your life. If you come from a space that all things are possible, that you are in fact one with the limitless one.
Giulio, when you are trying to think the best way to say this, but when you are going to manifest something, when you're looking at creating something, is there a thought process that goes into that, or is it literally like a divine inspiration pops up, like say with the new collaboration on your book, does that sort of just pop up and then from there it's almost informing you moment to moment to moment as far as what's going to happen? Or is there any sort of thinking aspect of like, okay, well, we got to do this, or I got to do that, or what's that process like for you personally when you're in that act of creation?
I'm going to say it happens two ways. So, for example, with the new book, that was spontaneous. So it just came to me, and the offer was there to write it. And I said, of course, yes, more than happy to. And so that was just an allowing state. Even, for example, though, when I wrote and wanted Open Your Third Eye to be published, I had tried to get into this publisher before and wasn't successful. And I had not even written the book. I had only written the synopsis, a one-page synopsis. And when I tell you two that I came from such a space of, I don't care if they take it or not, I couldn't care. That's when they couldn't wait to publish it. They said, how much time do you need to write it? I said, give me 3 months. I wrote it in about 4 or 5 weeks. That's what I'm talking about. So when you come from that, you have that desire, but you're not attached to, like, you have to. That is the lesson that most of us receive, is not be attached to it. There are other things that will pop up and you feel it resonates, whether it's a home or a car. So they will spontaneously, and then next thing you know, you're seeing yourself driving that. You feel the reality of it, and then you let go of the attachment. You don't put your happiness. So the things that you enjoy, they don't have that happiness attachment with it. So you can enjoy them, but you're not attached. So it happens one of two ways. For the most part, you either get inspired, something will come up, because when you're operating from that dimension of consciousness, things are coming to you because there's no resistance. You're not coming from, so it's all about coming from a space that all things are possible. And then it's sort of, you have a knowing in the back of your mind that things are just going to be coming to you. And then it's a choice whether you take them on or not. So the most important thing or aspect of that is, what's your vibrational frequency at? Are you coming from a space that things are difficult, or things come to me easily? Again, what's that sponsoring thought? Is all of God for you, or is life against you? Again, that's a major one to really look at and reflect and decide for yourself. Again, not on past data, because past data is, like I said, the past. And if we come from that space, that is completely limiting. We want to come from the potential and possibility of now, always now, and what can happen.
Mhm. Beautiful. Giulio, I think we are coming up on time here with everything. Is there any final messages that you would like to leave with the audience, either around the concept of life, death, and beyond, or just words of wisdom for changing times, whatever you think would be important to leave with people?
Sure. What I'll mention, I think it's important because I think a lot of human beings have this underlying fear of death, that fear of the unknown. What I'll say is death is an idea and a belief from this world. Death is a fear of loss, and when we identify with the physical body, that's where that fear really comes into play. If we realize death is simply rebirth, that death is letting go, that death is letting go and allowing potential and possibility to manifest. So whether it's you're letting go of an attachment, that's a death. Whether you make a massive shift in consciousness and you let go of the ego, that's ego death. Anytime you let go of a limiting negative thought, you're chipping away and you're calling forth, you're creating a bit of ego death, and more allowing the birth, the resurrection of who you truly are, the authentic self, the soul. So death is nothing to be feared but understood, realizing it's actually serves a purpose, and the purpose is for rebirth, whatever it is we're talking about, whether it's emotional, whether it's the death of a relationship that has failed and is now, when you let that go, you allow for something else to come forth, whether it's the physical death of someone, you're literally dying to one world and being reborn into another. So death is simply shift of focus, shift of awareness. Again, it's something to be understood that there's nothing wrong with it, because essentially death is nothing but change.
Yeah.
Beautiful. That's such a timely message, especially now that we've just stepped over into spring equinox.
It's also like shows us the importance of practicing this stuff throughout this lifetime. You know, it's like the more that we keep practicing with all this stuff on just like letting go of our attachments and surrendering the process over and doing this, I think we then become very seasoned for when we are having to deal with, some of these bigger deaths, whether it's loved ones in our lives or whether it's ourselves coming towards the end of our time here. It's this practice, we've done it. I think of it like training for the Olympics. You don't just pop up there without any training. It's going to kind of blow you away. But if you put in the time and you're practicing and you're doing this all the way, then when the time comes, you're ready to show up really fully.
It becomes effortless, and death can be seen as something that's beautiful, especially if one is practicing it, and from a mastery standpoint, allowing death to just allowing moments to die, because when you allow moments to die, and you can use your breaths as a gauge on how to do that, letting go of one moment, coming into a new one, you're literally stepping into a new dimension every time, because you're not repeating the past, you're not limiting yourself, you're allowing potential and possibility. And personally, like, that's been demonstrated, especially with what's been going on in the backyard with the UAPs and the UFOs showing up, and that. So I never dreamed that would happen. Did I know they existed? Yes. But did I ever think they would show up? No, it was quite spontaneous, and that's a testament to their spontaneity of the soul, because we're all one.
Wonderful. Giulio, always such a pleasure chatting with you. Where can people learn more about the work that's coming up, the new book that's coming up, all of your other work that you're doing?
So my website, giulioconsiglio.com. I'm on Instagram, Giulio Consiglio, Facebook. I'm on Twitter, and if they go to the website, there'll be announcements on when the book is coming out, the new book. And if anyone wants to be in contact for individual or group teachings, they can get a hold of me through the website.
We will have all of those links in the show notes like usual. And check them out. Giulio's got some fascinating work that he's done. I think his books are really, really important ones. I mean, if you're resonating with the message that Giulio's talking about, check out his other work, because it's sometimes nice to sit down with a book on your own time and just, let it dissolve in, right? Giulio, thank you so much.
Thank you to both of you. It's always a pleasure. Absolutely.
Likewise, Julia.